Hello. All right.
Hello.
And welcome to the Autistic Wonder Years. So, before we get started, who here is familiar with the TV show The Wonder Years?
I am because I think it's from a long time ago and I'm old.
I'm not here to make a comment on people's ages. That's a different presentation I sometimes give related, but that presentation usually is about unspoken social rules from the anime community and materials that teachers can use to teach social skills from that community. But that's another subject. Um, so, in the Wonder Years, a a it's a coming of age TV show about a boy from like pre-adolescence to adulthood. And in this TV show, basically his maturity is covered. And for those of you who remember the show, you probably remember he fell in love with the girl next door named Winnie Cooper and had a lot of adventures with her. And now, for those of you who are not aware or do not know about the Wonder Years, it was a TV show that was depicting the maturity of a boy from pre-adolescence to adolescence. But it used a unique feature in that while it was sharing those stories, there was an adult narrating what was going on inside the mind of the teenage boy. And how the show framed itself was every single show was set 20 years prior to the day the show was aired. And the adult narration was basically pretending to be that boy as a adult male 20 years later. Basically, here's the teenager, and now the man is in his 30s, and he's narrating what was going on in his head during his adolescence and his pre-adolescence. Well, this presentation is meant to be in that style. I am an autistic adult in my 30s, and in this presentation, you are going to watch preserved video footage of myself from infancy to childhood. This is footage that has been converted from the old style of VHS tapes from when it was first recorded to a digital format. And the purpose of this presentation is I'm going to make a commentary as an adult from the footage you are about to see, footage that occurred before I was diagnosed with autism, to demonstrate how, as an adult, I am looking back at my infancy and childhood, what was going on in my head with the memories I have from that footage, or if not, pointing out precursors from as early as infancy to autistic symptoms that I would then display later in life that would then become the basis of my autism diagnosis in the style of the Wonder Years. So that's why the presentation is called the Autistic Wonder Years, because in that style, I'm going to be making commentary about my infancy and my childhood. Today's presentation is going to be divided into two sections. The first section will be comprised of footage that was done prior to my autism diagnosis at the age of 3. The second section is going to consist of footage after I was diagnosed with autism. And if we have enough time, it will conclude with a piece of footage that occurred shortly after I learned I had autism at the age of 8. So now, without further ado, Welcome to the journey of the Autistic Wonder Years. My story begins in 1988. I was born on the 20th of August in New York City. I was the oldest and first child of my parents. My parents were what you would call back then, though of course things are changing now, older parents. My mom was 37, my dad was 40, and I was their first child. They didn't know much about autism, and in fact, the reason why I was diagnosed at the age of 3 is because they thought that many of my symptoms of autism were just bad, terrible twos until I turned 3, the symptoms didn't go away, and they realized, okay, there's probably something else going on, and that became the basis of my autism diagnosis. But before I was diagnosed with autism, my parents were good friends with a physical therapist and a person who worked closely with disabled children, a man by the name of Mitch. And when Mitch found out that my parents had just had a new baby, Mitch phoned them and said, "Hey, I work with disabled kids. I want to observe a typically developing infant." My parents were asked by Mitch, "Hey, can I come over to your house, to your apartment in New York, and film your infant from birth to 18 months so that I can observe the trajectory of a typically developing infant, so I can learn how infants typically develop and become children in contrast with the disabled children I'm working with?" My parents said, okay. So from birth to 18 months, I was the poster child of typically developing infancy. Because at the time, autism was not as widely known. And so what's interesting is if you look back at the footage, as you are about to see clips of, you will notice that symptoms of autism appeared from even when I was a month old, but they weren't being observed or seen as autistic symptoms because of that lack of knowledge. So without further ado, for the first section of this presentation, I am going to show clips from the monthly sessions that were recorded by Mitch, who filmed me from birth to 18 months back in my parents' New York apartment. I will be giving commentary with the clips you're about to see regarding various autistic symptoms to focus on when you look at the footage. I also want to give a disclaimer. Because of the personal nature of this video footage and the fact that this is the first time I'm hosting this session will not be recorded or released. This is a session that will strictly stay between us and the participants. Time will come at a later time when the videos are ready to be released and shared for other research purposes. So without further ado, my first video begins in September 1988. I am 1 month old, and I am about to be introduced by Mitch, who is filming me, believing he is looking at a typically developing infant. Can everyone see the screen? That's my mother. Joan Matthews.
You know, he was ours.
You'll get to meet my father later.
He's much better at straightening out his legs now than he was. He used to always want to come car. I remember the time when he was floating around in the pool. On a little pool. Set away from grass. Keeps his hand when he's hungry. Sometimes his stomach, that's not good enough. Hand is much better.
Mm-hmm.
So he's got that walking reflex.
Do you have James go on his stomach for me?
Yeah. Okay. Now, he doesn't like it and he immediately sort of tries to go back, like a little beetle that's on the wrong side.
Mm-hmm.
What's she doing to me?
Wow.
Sometimes he'll fall asleep. And they just sort of conk out, and then when he wakes up, he'll immediately begin where he left off, trying to get away.
Okay, now take a look at one thing here. During the entire time of this video, you may notice one very pretty prevalent autistic symptom being shown here, that I'm not making any eye contact whatsoever with my mom. That I'm in my own little world here, and I'm not making any effort to actually interact openly with my mom or Mitch, who is filming that session. All right. Next up is myself 1 month later.
Are we going now?
Okay.
Then I start again.
And this is my dad, Doug Williams.
So it's record.
Yeah, it's recording.
Oh, it is
It's
recording.
close moving, yeah.
Oh my goodness, I didn't hear anything.
James at 8 weeks. He now weighs about 13 pounds and 6 ounces, and he is how long?
Measure him, you gotta hold
Can
his
you straighten your legs?
legs
for me?
right there.
Mom and dad.
It's a lot easier for him to straighten his legs now when he wants to. There.
I should try this side here.
Okay, can you straighten him out? Although sometimes he gets a little shy. He now is noticing us.
23 inches.
23?
Yeah. Well, 23 inches, a little more. Look to the bottom of his foot.
How much is
Almost 24
He
inches.
weighs 13.6
Mhm.
approximately. He started focusing on me a couple of weeks ago, and he would watch me walking around. Instead of staring at the point of the most light in the room, he would immediately orient himself toward me. When I show him himself in the mirror, he immediately looks at my image. His image means nothing to him at this moment. See, he's trying to stare this way, and he said he's fascinated at. He will stare at the breast now. Nursing, he just doesn't have a glassy stare in his face. He actually focuses on it. It's his favorite thing in the world.
All right. So now notice here, clearly there's an attempt to make eye contact. At the same time, too, there's also a notice of focusing and all that. And what's interesting is notice how my mother talks about, how light is impacting what I'm looking at. This actually is a precursor to something that would occur later when I was around 3 and 4. That actually was a precursor to sensitive sight. And see, one of the things that my parents didn't know, but now has been shared in research, is that many autistic children will naturally try to engage in self-help behaviors, to try to calm themselves from the impacts of sensitive senses. And I had a habit when I was a kid of shining flashlights in my eyes, and my parents couldn't understand, why I was doing that. Wouldn't that hurt my eyes? What they didn't realize, and I didn't realize as a kid, is that that was because I had sight sensitivities, and my eyes were trying to desensitize themselves. And that's when you have sensitive sight, shining flashlights and those things, the eyes are trying to normalize themselves. Also, notice something too. You remember how in the last segment, my mother commented that I had a hard time, lying on my stomach? Although my parents didn't realize this back then, I actually went to a medical autism conference. And at that conference, a medical physician who did a lot of research on autism and GI issues explained to parents that many autistic children will have trouble with certain lying down positions because it can cause them to have a stomach upset if they have GI issues. And I had many GI issues growing up. In fact, my parents often noted that oftentimes when movements would often be undigested food. And of course, they didn't realize the time, but when I learned that from that doctor and I told my story, he speculated that many of those resistances to lying in uncertain positions probably could have been just the precursor to GI issues. All right, next up, 1 month later, 3 months of age.
And sleeps and does a lot of cryptic things. He's smiling all the time, not every time, but in the morning he's so happy to be awake. He smiles and he beams at me, and even when he's crying, sometimes he's so happy to be alive, he'll smile and then continue crying. He loves to bat his mobile and kick at his crib gym, and he will do that for about a half an hour, and then he'll decide that that's enough, and he'll start crying. But during that half an hour, bliss. He's his own boss, and he can almost understand that if he hits the mobile with his hands, that it will make a noise. He doesn't quite understand, but more than last night. And he's also eating up a storm and not crying and screaming so much at night. So he's getting so civilized, we almost don't know what to do with ourselves at night. Do you have anything to add? Okay.
How about his weight? And the amount of weight changes and height?
Right, he weighs 16 pounds, 15 ounces.
17 pounds. 17 pounds.
Okay, we'll round it up. And he's 24 and 3/4 inches. That's
25 inches.
okay. He was 13.6 the last time, so whatever that is.
All right. Now, take a look at two things here. Two other precursors we can see in this clip. Notice that my mother's talking about, those active bursts of energy and then crying. As a child, it was determined that I didn't have the same muscular strength as other children. And what you can look at here is the emergence of that lesser strength, the sense that basically what's happening is that I'm engaging in these bursts of energy and then feeling very tired and exhausted, which is probably what the crying is being caused by. Also notice that I'm eating a lot. She's mentioned I'm eating up a storm. I was breastfed, and so she is referring to obviously when she is nursing me. And later on in life, there was a time when I actually never felt full. I would stuff myself and then actually feel hungry like 5 minutes later. And I had this issue for several years in childhood. So what was interesting to me was when I watched this, looking back at things that my parents were noticing about me as an infant and then making connections as to, hey, these are precursors to things that I do remember going through in childhood. For time constraints, we are now going to go to 2 months later. Actually, we're going to go to a clip about a month and a half later from a Christmas family gathering. You'll get to meet some of my extended family. That's my grandfather, that's my uncle, my dad's brother. That's my aunt.
Video camera.
We advise them to watch it. Maybe you might get rewarded. I have remembered that.
Well, when I look at that video, I think, oh boy, somebody's gonna get squirted.
There was only one time when he peed, but it was.
Well, every time I would change it, after I loosened it, I would pull it there for a minute. But very often after it was loosened, that's when I would come.
Yeah, that's a paper program. I'm really careless about this. I'll just put the clothes on and then change the diaper. That's the end of the new clothes. And they'll happen so fast. I'm looking all over his face. He'll just be sitting there calmly with his water dripping down his face.
Oh, you're talking about me and you're insulting me.
Yeah. Just stop talking all this.
His shoulders are, he has to be his pregnant. Well, we got this so-called infant and child convertible seat this big. And there's no way he can fit in there. He just slouches over and rolls. Yeah. Now, is this an infant seat? I think this is an infant seat, but
Say hi. Say hi to yourself. Hi, Joan. Hi, Jane.
Okay. There are two precursors here that should be mentioned. First, notice that although my grandfather, the two older individuals you saw were my grandparents, notice that my grandfather, although he was joking, also tried to pretend to be in my defense regarding the insulting conversation. I had struggles having my extended family understand my autism, but my grandfather eventually became my defender in my family. What he didn't know back then is that eventually he would defend my autistic tendencies to people in my family who struggled to understand them. And then later on in life, when I became an emerging adult and he was in his last years of life, I would repay him by helping care for him. In fact, if time permits, the last segment I will be showing everybody is right when I found out I have autism, and I'm sitting with him, and he and I are having a special moment related to now the new knowledge of my autism. Also notice something too. Notice the music box playing in the background? That was a precursor to a symptom later on in childhood. See, one of the things that sometimes can puzzle parents and practitioners is that there is a tendency among sound-sensitive autistic children to constantly want to listen to their music. And when I was a kid, I always wanted to have music played around me. I always wanted to listen to music. And the puzzling thing is, okay, if you're sound sensitive, why do you always want to listen to music? And it's because music and certain types of music has sound playing on multiple frequencies that tend to also be frequencies that individual sounds might just play on certain frequencies that will bother an autistic child, and that music serves a way of blocking out the unpleasant sounds that will often play on a single frequency, while music itself will be playing on multiple frequencies. In fact, you know, composers and people who perform music have been validated by people who study music scientifically that when you hear a beautiful song, it's because the composers created a song where the song is played uniformly on different frequencies. And a lot of autistic children often will be calmed by constantly hearing music around them because it blocks the unpleasant sounds around them. And in fact, there was a time when I was so sound sensitive. I had so many meltdowns from loud noises and just a sensory intense environment that my mom would always have to like keep a tape on or keep something playing in order to calm me down. All right. Our next piece of footage is from February 1989, 6 months of age.
6 months old, and he weighs 23 pounds, and I think he's 28 inches. So we're going to measure him.
He was 27 last. You measure now?
Yeah. He's going through what Brazelton called the new fussy stage. He loves being out. He loves being stimulated. He loves seeing other babies. And in fact, he embarrassed me at a mother's group. He was so loud and so crazy.
What is he release?
28.
Oh, a little more.
Really?
Just a, yeah, 20 and a quarter. Mm-hmm.
He was so crazy. I had to take him out of the room. He approaches other babies, you know, like King Kong. Beating his chest, reaching out. And he's getting a little bit sensitive to what other people can take and what they can't. He'll often pull my hair when he's approaching me, but someone came over the other day who would not have liked her hair pulled. He just stroked it very gently.
Oh.
It was very tender. He's using his hands together a lot. And he'll pick something up. I've been giving him whole wheat pretzels, and he will hold them with both hands, and it'll go this way or it'll go that way, depending, you know.
He'll reach with both hands?
Sometimes.
All right, so now let's take a look at something here. One thing that a lot of autistic children do is when they feel like they have to do something unpleasant, they will try to assert control of the situation. And in many ways, what you may notice my mother talking about now, he's trying to interact with other children. He's trying to be like King Kong. And in fact, what you're looking at is the precursor to the autistic tendency of trying to assert control over a potentially unpleasant situation. Now, unfortunately, due to time constraints, I am not able to show much of the future infant footage. I'm going to have to fast forward into the next section of the presentation because I want to leave time for questions, and I also will be available afterwards to talk to anyone who wants to discuss things further. And this is now the after diagnosis footage. This next footage starts from when I am 3 years old. I've been diagnosed with autism, and now you're going to see some commentary related to some of that footage. Around this time, my parents were still living in New York City, and they lived near Columbia University, and they hired a Columbia University student to babysit me to give them a little respite. And they actually asked them to film one of their babysitting sessions. Unfortunately, some craziness occurred for reasons that they did not understand.
James. James, okay?
I'm recording.
Now you're recording. See in the upper right side where it
Okay.
says REC? Now the little greater than signs are going.
Okay.
The full auto has to do.
Actually, I have some other footage prior to this to share. I am now 3 years old. I've been diagnosed with autism.
Did it? Is it unstuck now?
The people pop.
Is it unstuck?
That's the people pop.
Oh yeah, okay, that's unstuck now. That's a black. What is that? That's a black Pia Pop. Okay. Oh, I know. We got a little shocked, right? Okay, so we're gonna play a little piano, huh? The brown one? Yeah. There we go.
So here's what happened between the infant footage you saw and what you're seeing here. When I was 18 months old, my autistic symptoms exploded. From birth to 18 months, my parents were able to look at that footage retrospectively and see the emergence of autism. But it was still subtle to the point where they still didn't make a connection that there was something wrong. But then suddenly, I transformed at 18 months to a very severely impacted child. I actually said a few first words, mama and dad, at 18 months, and then lost my language for a while. So around that time, I had many meltdowns, and very little and only one piece of camera footage was actually made during that time in my life. Because although there was extensive film footage from birth to 18 months, that was the camera of Mitch. And then this video was the first video my parents filmed of me at the age of 3 when they got their first camera. Now notice, I have some language, but it's not the typical language you would associate with a 3-year-old. Also notice the lollipops. Those lollipops were called people pops. And notice that table that I had. Back then, I was trying to find something that was static, that was sane, that I had control over, because as a kid, I felt like the world just was too much for me. It was too unpredictable. And my candy table was my symbol of sameness. And so I would collect lollipops, but I couldn't eat them because I was a picky eater and didn't like them. And I actually would collect lollipops and create a candy table. And I'll never forget when my parents decided to move from New York to Illinois, and they had to get rid of my candy table, which was at the time that symbol of safeness. Now notice the piano playing. That was mistaken by my parents as the precursor of a savant skill, that I would become a good piano player, similar to an adult with autism that's pretty well known. You know, anyone know Matt Savage, the savant adult piano player? What they didn't realize is that my piano playing was actually not a precursor to playing the piano at all. But what they didn't realize that was something I wanted to do independently. In fact, they gave me piano lessons, and because now I had to follow a piano teacher, I grew to hate piano. I eventually grew to hate piano, and then eventually begged my parents to stop giving me those lessons because I just didn't want to be taught. I wanted to do music independently. And later on, I actually took up the recorder and learned how to play it independently without lessons, because I've always liked music. I've listened to music, but I was always my own independent person with music. So if you take a look at this piano music, be warned, it doesn't mean that I'm going to become a savant.
Now the little greater than signs are going.
Okay,
The full auto has to do with other stuff.
so what was I doing? Just watching?
But
Can you do a third
you
for
were
me?
just watching.
Is that a third for me? Good. Can you do a fifth for me? Is that a fifth?
That's a fifth, yeah.
Yay! Can you do a second for me?
So no, just because a child is playing piano or anything doesn't mean he's going to become professional or that is a savant skill. Now we take you to the crazy segment of babysitting at Columbia University.
Yeah, I had that.
Or we could do the stairs first, James? Okay, we'll go do the stairs. Okay. What do you
I
have to do?
really enjoyed visiting.
Push it, right? There you go.
I really enjoyed visiting Tiffany, my babysitter. I always,
You want to go to B? You want to go get food?
yes.
Okay.
This dorm had a restaurant called Macintosh's, and that restaurant had one of my favorite foods, one of the few foods that I would eat. French fries and orange juice.
Where are we going, James? We're going to go B. Go to B. Yeah, we'll go to
Now,
B.
one thing you also have to remember too,
We're going to have to go back upstairs.
even when you discipline an autistic child for behaving inappropriately, many autistic people live their whole lives never understanding what's appropriate or inappropriate, and instead, they're always looking to engage in behaviors where they aren't going to get disciplined for. And if something works for them, they're going to do that behavior as many times as possible. So one of the reasons why I wanted to go to the basement and get the French fries is because I wasn't disciplined for that earlier. It was something that was working for me. A lot of autistic children operate under the mindset what's gonna enable the adults to not discipline me, because I don't know when I'm getting disciplined, whether or not that's appropriate or an inappropriate behavior. They can tell me it's inappropriate, but I still don't understand why.
Only on Friday. See, closed. But we can go back upstairs and then we'll go to Macintosh. Okay? We'll go to 5. Yeah. Eat at 5. No, we'll go to 5. Get your coat and then we'll go to Macintosh. Yeah.
But of course, as I learned, Macintosh was not in the basement.
Yeah. You want to push the button? You want to push the button, James? James, are you going to push the button?
The story isn't very strong when you see it, and it's kind of like they want every number to be like a showstopper, and it doesn't work. But the people singing, at least in the version that I'm working on, are really good. And Canyon. My conquests. Yeah.
Do you like Coca-Cola?
Okay, so now in this segment, I keep saying the words "God damn it." Now, here's what they didn't know and what my parents didn't know. My father was not a bad parent, but he often would say swear words when he was frustrated. And one of the common things people thought is that if you had language issues, you didn't process language around you. Now we know that you can be nonverbal, but still understand what people are saying around you. And there were many times when, because of my sensitive hearing, I would hear my dad saying, "God damn it," in frustration. And he was by himself and he had no idea that I heard it. But what he didn't know is that I was routinely hearing what others were saying. And I said, "God damn it," over and over again because my dad would say this, thinking he was by himself, not realizing I heard him say it. And I would just repeat it because I couldn't understand, why is everyone telling me it's a bad word if my dad is saying this? And so let this be a lesson. Just because a child has language issues doesn't mean that they can't process what people are saying around them. Now, the next clip I'm going to show in entirety. This is a clip involving a meltdown that I had when I was 3 years old. I'm going to show this in entirely because this clip really shows the essence of how a meltdown can start and how it can be misunderstood.
Let's see, let's put it in. Let's focus it. Mama will do the M. There, okay, Mama will do the M.
Now you need to notice one other thing too. When I struggled with language, one of the biggest struggles I had was understanding pronouns. So notice that for the most part, I'm not saying I or you properly. I'm referring to everyone by their proper name.
Yay, now Mama will do. There, now Boone will do the I. L. Yay, now do the L. Okay, wait, we're gonna end it. Oh, come on, sweetheart. Wait, we're gonna finish it. No, stop it right now. Stop it right now. Stop it right now, sweetheart. Stop it. We're gonna pause.
That's my baby sister who is less than a year old, who was just born a month ago.
What do you want to do, sweetheart? What do you want, sweetheart? And now people wonder why they want. Okay, we're gonna pick up the little Boone. We finished it, sweetheart. It looks very beautiful. Okay, now we'll do it again. What else, sweetheart? Okay, turn the page then. What are we doing, sweetheart? Okay, turn the page, we'll start over again. Oh, are you feeling better, sweetheart? Okay, we won't record you anymore. Here are the boxes. We're packing to move. There's little Boone. She's sleeping. There's the air conditioners. We're on our way to moving. Bye, Boone.
Okay. Here's the commentary about what happened. First of all, my parents nicknamed myself Boone and Big Boone and called my younger sister Little Boone. I had a very hard time at first understanding proper pronouns. But what you have to understand here is that although I had a hard time speaking properly, I actually learned how to read and write before I could speak. And I was always interested in car brands, and I would often write car brands. So what happened was that we were writing Oldsmobile together, and I wanted it to be perfect. And my mom asked me to write L before I was done with the I. And I got very upset that she had asked me to write L when I wasn't done with the I. And so the meltdown started because I wanted to start it over. I was not happy with the fact that it wasn't spelled properly. And my mom didn't understand why that was a big deal to me. I felt like I was crushed. Why did my mom ask me to write the I and the L at the same time? So when I'm saying, you want the L, what I'm really saying is, A, I want the L. I just couldn't understand I. What I'm trying to say is, hey, I want to restart this and have a proper L. What is important to remember is that autistic children see things in a very extreme way. And just because typical people don't see things with that seriousness, that doesn't mean it's not real to the autistic child. And, you know, I think of the fact that although Dr. Bruno Bettelheim has often been seen in a negative light because he had the discredited theory that autism was the product of bad refrigerator mothers, there was one thing that I think he got right. Yeah, now obviously we know now that, you know, refrigerator mothers didn't cause their kids to have autism. But one thing he got right is that he did a lot. He was a concentration camp survivor, and he noticed that autistic children were behaving in extreme ways to things that typical people were responding to, the extreme situations they were being put into in concentration camps. And he finally, and he did end up, he realized that in the minds of an autistic child, their brains are going through the same responses that typical people would go through in extreme situations. And he believed that one of the ways that you to help understand what an autistic child is going through is compare it to what a typical person might go through in an extreme situation. So although I don't believe that, you know, Bettelheim's refrigerator mother theory was accurate, understanding an autistic child by referencing an extreme situation has validity. And I think that we should still remember that part of Bettelheim's work, even if we don't have to agree with his refrigerator mother theory. This next segment now is a segment that occurred during speech therapy. Now, this is important because you will notice that I did something that was correct in the eyes of the speech therapist, but not for the reasons the speech therapist actually thought.
We ran out of gas.
So I'm supposed to look at flashcards and sort them into what's a food or an animal.
You want to do the letter word? Yeah. Structure I want to do food and animals. It's a step beyond L&M. Actually behind L&M.
Oh.
Most kids do food and animals before they do
Oh.
This is a fish. A fish is a animal. Animal. Put it in the animal pile.
Well, it is a food too.
Yes, you're right.
Okay.
It says animal.
Oh.
This is a tiger. It is a animal. So you put the tiger in the right.
Okay, so why is this important? The speech therapist gave me a fish flashcard and said, what is it, an animal or food? And I said it was an animal. And my mom, who's filming it, says, well, you know, it's a food too. Well, here's what has to be remembered here. I actually didn't say it was an animal because I knew it was also a food. I was a picky eater back then. I hated fish. I did not consider fish to be a food at all. The only thing I saw fish to be was an animal. So by coincidence, I happened to get it right because due to my autism, I did not see fish as anything but an animal. But what the speech teacher didn't know was this wasn't a sign of language development. It was because of an autistic association. And we have to remember that sometimes that autistic kids don't know what they're being expected of developmental wise. So we have to we have to keep in mind that sometimes an autistic child might get the right answer or do something developmental, but that doesn't mean that necessarily they're doing so for the developmental reasons we think they are. I'm now going to play a quick segment of one of the first times I played with another child my age, where I actually enjoyed playing. But notice there's still autistic tendencies being shown in that play.
Oh, look at that branch. Okay, we're gonna open this now.
I am now 4 years old.
Whoa.
Now my family has also moved from New
Okay.
York to the state of Illinois. And
Can you
this
turn it
is
on,
one of my
Shane?
first friends.
Okay, James is gonna show you, okay? Okay, you're gonna show her how to do it, because she doesn't know. She hasn't seen it before. Wait, Sinead, let him play. Okay, let him play with it, sweetheart. Okay, can you spell baby? B-A.
You didn't guess it.
Oh, you know what?
You did the insane.
Sinead,
Two things. My friend's name was Sinead, and Sinead lived in the backyard behind my parents' first house in Illinois. But I can tell you something. Sinead was the first child that I actually enjoyed playing with. For years, I never really had any interest in playing, but suddenly when I saw Sinead, this warm, fuzzy feeling went through me, and suddenly I wanted to play with somebody. What I didn't know back then, what my parents didn't know back then, is another tendency that shaped the rest of my childhood. My best friends were girls. And by the time I got, and interestingly enough, when I was in high school, there was a huge gap, gender-wise, in tolerance of my autism. The vast majority of my friends were female. There was a higher level of tolerance among my autistic tendencies among girls I was friends with than other boys, to the point where the 3 boys I was friends with in the 5th grade, we all had a bitter falling out when it turned out they weren't as nice as I thought they were. Now, I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to quickly get through some of the next segments. This next segment, which is going to be the final segment I'm going to show prior to my little moment with my grandfather for time constraints. This is the segment that was filmed, which finally shows figuring out proper pronouns. But notice that I figured them out at a time when I felt like I needed to speak up for myself.
gonna zoom in under the boom.
That's my sister.
Wait, chew that. That has to go on down first. Come on. Or there's still some in the bowl. Is that your favorite? Is that your favorite?
That's the color I like.
Wait. I don't want those on the counter. They have to go away. Go in the wastebasket. Not on the floor. Come on. In the garbage.
Strawberry.
What's Stone Age strawberry? Did you make that one up?
That's a twirly.
That's the twirly push-up? We're going to eat these and then go buy some twirly push-ups?
Now my family has moved into the house that I would spend the rest of my childhood in.
Oh, good. Okay. Bye. To take a film of you eating the push-up? Oh, little Boone. No. Come on. There's little Boone. It melted? Better eat fast. It's okay. Can she have a bite? Can you share it?
No, it's James.
And who's that? Okay. Well, I would like you to share it with her. Mine, you said. Well, okay, no, she can't have a whole one. I want you to give her a bite.
So here's what happened. I had actually done something. My parents asked me to earn that push-up. So I was very upset that my mom now was demanding I share something that she had just asked me to do work for to get. And so I was telling her, hey, it's mine. I earned it. Why should I have to share this with my sister? And in many cases, development occurs when a child needs to speak up for themselves. So we're just out of time. So I'm going to share my last segment. And this is the fact that I've just found out I have autism. I'm just about to turn 9. This is my grandfather's 80th birthday. And I'm writing out with my mom the thoughts of my autism, which would eventually become my first book. And my grandfather's reading it to me.
Chapter 3.
My grandfather was the first person in my extended family to acknowledge my autism.
Whoops. Uh-oh.
All right. And that concludes my journey of the autistic wonder years. So we've got about 3 more minutes. So now if anyone has any questions, they can write in the chat. And I will stay as long as anyone wants to talk to me or discuss anything. Thank you all for coming to my session.